This channel is supported by TrueFire. TrueFire is an online library of lessons from some of my favourite players. There's thousands of lessons on there. You can use the promo code JNC40 to get 40% off of any of their courses. fairly obviously, you may have seen that this Murphy Lab guitar fell into my lap yesterday, courtesy of Jake Loosemore. Go check him out on Instagram. I think you may dig his playing if you like the sort of stuff that I'm into. A really, really tasty player and a good friend. Bit of a knobhead though. Anyway, he spends lots of money on really, really nice gear, and this is a bit of a problem because this one is sort of blown me away a little bit. It's the second time I played it, and the first time I played it for about an hour just clean into a plug-in at his house, and then yesterday I sort of played it for as long as I could before the baby had other plans. Anyway, I wanted to do a video sort of looking at what are the differences between this, which is every sort of few years they seem to come out with the more accurate take than ever before. I don't know how accurate these things are. Again, please, if you're a Les Paul geek, a Murphy Lab nerd, if you know lots of stuff about all of this stuff, I didn't mean that in a negative way, by the way, please let people know in the comments, because I think it's the sort of stuff that we are kind of interested in, isn't it, as people that spend too much money on gear. Now, anyway, the most obvious differences that have stood out to me is that the finish on this is much less plasticky. Now, it wasn't obvious to me that this was going to be the case until, you know, you pick them up side by side. Now, what I think this probably means is that this has a much thinner finish, and I feel like you can sort of feel the body resonate a little bit more with this. Now, but obviously, once you're amplified, that doesn't necessarily make the hugest difference in the world, but it does make some difference, I believe. Now, other things that I really noticed that really stood out to me that I didn't realise was a thing, the binding on this guitar is far thinner on the neck than on the standard. Now, that seems like a small thing that probably doesn't make a big difference, but what it actually means is you've got about half as wide binding, which means you've actually got more fret on this guitar here. Now, I think playability-wise, that does make a bit of a difference, because it's not that difficult on the standard to pull the string a little bit and you're suddenly in the kind of gap between the nib and the fret. Not a lovely place to be, let's be honest. So that was one thing that I noticed, and I've seen that on R8s and R9s just looking online. This binding is way slimmer, and as a result, you've got more fret material. Talking of fret material, these have, or this one particularly, I don't know if this is the case for all of them, I think it's maybe a true historic thing, have way smaller frets, and I really like that actually about this. It makes it feel, to me, a little bit closer to playing a Strat, because, I don't know, there's something about the smaller fret size, just to me, it takes away a little bit of that Les Paul bulky feeling. I'm actually finding bends a little bit more comfortable, and they're a bit closer to what I'm used to feeling on this guitar. I was finding I was bending slightly more in tune when I do bend, which isn't that often. I think this has a nylon nut on it, or something like that. As I say, I'm not a total Les Paul nerd, as could be evidenced yesterday when I called the die on this Aniline. It's, of course, Aniline. I think that's what it's actually called. The reason that this is a thing, basically the Murphy Lab, apparently, Jake went to the custom shop a couple of weeks back. Anytime they use this Aniline die, they basically have to stop using the workshop for quite a while, because it basically comes out in all the other guitars. It's really not that easy to work with, or not that easy to come out on other guitars. So say you were building white guitars after you've been working with this die, it takes a long time to get this red out of the situation, out of the workshop, so that they can actually use it. So I think what essentially you're getting with the Murphy Lab is you're paying them to use things that were closer to what those classic guitars were, you know, whether that's pickups, whether that's period correct plastics, or whether that's this Aniline die, which is a bit of a bum to work with, or smaller frets, which potentially even some people might not prefer. I know for me, when I found out that I had smaller frets, I was thinking, is that a benefit, or is that a not so good thing? I think having played this, it really works fantastically well, and you know, that might be something that I would look for if I was looking for a Les Paul from now on, you know, something with smaller frets. Other things, this one is a pound lighter than the standard. which is significant. So this is between sort of £8 and £8.5, which is, I think, a real sweet spot for a Les Paul. Of course, a Les Paul without any weight relief is going to potentially end up quite heavy, but clearly part of some of the Murphy Lab guitars is they select some light pieces of wood so that you end up with a nice thing like this. The flame maple wouldn't usually be on a 58 spec. It would normally be plain maple, but I think this was hand-picked for this. There's some fairly aggressive checking on this. This is apparently the light relic, or extra light relic, but you still get a super checked finish. Interesting little fact, Tom Murphy, when Jake was there, was building himself a guitar that he'd made, and he still has to pay for his own guitars from the Murphy Lab, if you could believe such a thing. So that seemed odd to me, but yeah, a beautiful guitar. If I had to make the comparison, which I am doing, the neck feels quite similar, but because of these, I think the shoulders feel a little bit rounder on this. I really like the small frets a lot. I think playability wise, this is a lot more resonant. And I don't know if it comes across in the clips. You've got, like, to me it sounds a little bit less congested, and this is something that Tim just sent me. He has a 58, I think, VOS. I think he said he found some of the standards sort of tended towards that more MIDI congested Les Paul tone, whereas these can be a little bit more lively, a little bit brighter. Now, one of the things about my Les Paul is that it's got Monty's underwound paths in it, which are considerably lower output than you'd get on a normal standard, and it's got the 50s wiring. So I think that's why you end up with a thing that is quite close in tone. Let me know in the comments if you preferred the tone of either of them, or maybe you don't care at all. But I think for me, the main differences with this were playability wise and aesthetic wise, rather than tones, although I think this is a little bit more spanky, a little bit more lively, and I guess part of that might be something to do with having higher quality woods used, having less kind of plasticky nitro on it. Anyway, it just ends up being a fantastic guitar. I have to say that from playing this one, which might be a standout one, or it may be the case that a lot of Murphy Labs are fantastic, I'd say that this, to me, is a much nicer guitar than my standard. And I thought my standard was pretty nice. It's a 2002. Let me just go and grab that. So yeah, this is a 2002 Les Paul standard, and I think you can probably see just how shiny the finish is in comparison, and again how much thicker this binding is. So it ends up feeling a little bit more plasticky in your hands. I'm not saying that's a terrible thing, it's just a thing. As I say, this has had a pickup upgrade, so I think tonally they're not worlds apart. Those are the kind of differences that I'm feeling, as well as this having a maybe slightly less chunky neck. This is the 50s neck, but I think Jake's Les Paul, the Murphy Lab, definitely, although very expensive, fantastic. And I think this is the thing to try and remember with these companies like Fender and Gibson. I think corporately the idea is to make a Les Paul shaped thing at every single price range, so that whatever your price range is when you go into a shop, you could come out with a Les Paul shaped thing, whether that's an Epiphone or a one-off Murphy Lab collector's choice that costs 15 grand or whatever. The idea is, I think, that it's a Gibson Les Paul shaped thing that you can just pay for. And I think there are going to be good and bad examples across all of the range. And there's no reason that you can't get a really good Les Paul standard. I think this will have weight relief. So it's probably got just generally heavier wood used on it. Even still with the weight relief, it's a pound lighter than the Murphy Lab. You know, if you were gigging this sort of thing, that would make a real difference, I think, over the course of a gig. As well as this one, just in general, I think feeling a bit less resonant, a little bit less spanky. Still a good guitar, I think, but doesn't wow me anymore in quite the same way as the Murphy Lab. I did make a video talking about how it's kind of difficult to know what the differences are between some of these guitars as well. So you can get a long tenon Epiphone Les Paul, I like the Lazarus Joe Bonamassa and stuff. This has a long tenon, which essentially means that the neck join goes under the pickup. or it has a piece of wood that extends under it. I think that one over there would be a rocker joint. Do any of these things really make a difference? I'm not totally sure, to be honest with you. And whether you should care or not, I'm not sure. I think you should probably play a bunch of Les Pauls if you can, and maybe choose one that works for you. This one, I can see 100% why Jake loved it. It's just a very expensive guitar, but I think at the end of the day, if you were to buy, you know, one of the things that these are based on, those are now about the price of a house. If this stops you spending house money on a guitar, then maybe they're worth it. And I think, yeah, I want to kind of have a look at the R8s and R9s as well, because this is obviously a Murphy Lab, which is a step up above that, you know, made by a team of 4 people. The R8s and R9s, they're a bit more plentiful. I wonder, let me know your thoughts if you've tried one of those, your thoughts on them. I'd love to know whether you've got specific favourites of them. Again, it's difficult to me to know what you need to go for to get this sort of spec in one of those guitars though. Would you need like a true historic? I don't really even know. An R8 of some form. Yeah, it's just a bit of a hunt, isn't it, to know what you're getting. But yeah, 50s wiring, lower output pickups is the sort of thing that I think would be a real benefit. And if you're trying to get in the vicinity of a guitar like this. But unfortunately, to get as special as that, I think maybe you do have to spend quite a bit of money. Yeah. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Cheers.